Today, we're looking at one of the most controversial geopolitical disputes happening in the modern world. It involves history, territory, archaeology, and global power competition. Imagine discovering that an area your ancestors used for fishing, sailing, and trade for centuries is suddenly controlled by another country. Not through a single battle, not through a peace treaty, but through construction, military presence, and historical claims that are still being debated today. This situation reflects what is happening in parts of the South China Sea. Several countries claim sections of this region. It is one of the most strategically important bodies of water on Earth. It connects major global trade routes and contains valuable fishing grounds and possible energy resources. One of the biggest controversies involves China's claim to a large portion of this sea, often represented on maps using a curved boundary line sometimes called the 9-dash line. Supporters of China's position say the claim is based on historical navigation and fishing activity. Critics say the claim conflicts with modern international maritime law and historical evidence from other countries in the region. In 2016, an international legal tribunal reviewed maritime disputes connected to this region. The ruling stated that certain historical claims used to justify control over large areas of the sea did not meet international legal standards under current maritime law frameworks. However, the ruling did not resolve the conflict. Disputes and tensions continued. Around the same period, large-scale land reclamation and construction projects accelerated across several reef areas. These projects transformed small reef formations into large artificial islands. Official explanations described these projects as infrastructure development, including research stations, weather monitoring systems, and maritime safety facilities. Other governments and analysts argued the construction also had military strategic value. Environmental scientists also raised concerns. Coral reef ecosystems were damaged or destroyed during dredging operations. These reefs are not only environmental habitats, but sometimes also contain historical artifacts embedded within marine layers. Some marine archaeologists had previously reported finding pottery fragments, tools, and other materials suggesting long-term human activity in parts of these waters. However, verifying these findings remains difficult because many disputed sites are now restricted zones. It is important to be clear here. There is no universally accepted proof that archaeological sites were intentionally destroyed to hide historical evidence. Some experts believe construction simply prioritized strategic and engineering goals over environmental and historical preservation. Others believe the loss of seabed material may have erased valuable historical information that could have helped researchers better understand ancient maritime activity in the region. To understand why historical claims are so important in this dispute, we need to go further back in time. For thousands of years, Southeast Asia was connected by maritime trade networks. Early seafaring communities traveled between islands, trading goods, sharing culture, and building navigation knowledge passed down through generations. Archaeological discoveries across the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia show strong evidence of advanced seafaring cultures existing long before European colonial periods. Ancient Chinese records from early dynasties describe maritime routes across these waters. However, historians debate whether those records describe territorial control or simply navigation routes used for trade missions. By the medieval period, large regional empires controlled much of Southeast Asian trade. Coastal communities across the region regularly used reef areas and small islands as temporary fishing and navigation points. Later colonial records from European powers documented fishing activity, local names for reefs, and seasonal travel patterns across these waters. Because of this overlapping history, multiple countries believe they have historical connections to the region. The dispute is not only about history, it is also about economics. Every year, trillions of dollars worth of global trade moves through these shipping routes. Control over these waters can influence trade security, military strategy, and energy resource access. There are also large fishing industries depending on these waters. For coastal communities, access to fishing zones is not political theory. It is daily survival. When access becomes restricted due to territorial enforcement, local fishing communities often face major economic challenges. This is why tensions remain high. From one perspective, this is about historical rights and national security. From another perspective, it is about international law, shared maritime access, and resource fairness. The truth is, the full historical picture is extremely complex. Many ancient records are incomplete. Archaeological evidence underwater is difficult to preserve. Political narratives often shape how history is interpreted. Because of this, the South China Sea dispute is not just about territory. It is about history, identity, economics, and global power balance. And this is where part 1 ends, at the point where history, modern politics, and global strategy all intersect. Now let's move deeper into the modern phase of this dispute, the part that involves construction, military strategy, and global power positioning. Starting in the early 2010s, several reef areas in the South China Sea began undergoing rapid physical transformation. Using large dredging vessels, sand and seabed material were moved to build up land above sea level. Over time, small reef formations became large artificial islands capable of supporting buildings, runways, and infrastructure. From an engineering perspective, these projects were massive. Millions of tons of material were moved from the ocean floor. Entire ecosystems were reshaped in the process. Official statements described these developments as necessary for safety, research, and regional maritime support. Critics argued they also provided strong military advantages. Satellite imagery later showed airstrips, radar systems, and defensive infrastructure being installed on some of these artificial islands. Supporters of the construction say every major power builds strategic infrastructure when possible. Critics say this changed the balance of power in the region. For neighboring countries, this raised serious concerns. Because in maritime disputes, physical presence matters. Once permanent infrastructure exists, it becomes much harder to challenge control without escalating conflict. This created what some analysts call facts on the water. Not through treaties, not through negotiation, but through construction and long-term occupation. Another major concern involves environmental impact. Coral reef systems are some of the oldest living ecosystems on Earth. Some reefs grow slowly over thousands of years. When dredging removes these reefs, entire ecosystems disappear. Marine scientists have warned that reef destruction affects fish populations, regional biodiversity, and long-term ocean health. There is also a historical dimension to reef destruction. Sometimes reefs contain traces of past human activity, small fragments of pottery, tools, or materials lost from ships centuries ago. However, underwater archaeology is extremely difficult. Even without construction, many underwater historical materials naturally degrade over time. This means it is often impossible to know exactly what historical evidence may have existed in certain areas before large-scale construction began. Another key part of this conflict is economic control. The South China Sea carries an enormous portion of global shipping traffic. A large percentage of global trade passes through these waters every year. Oil shipments, manufactured goods, and raw materials all move through these routes. Control over sea lanes means influence over global supply chains. There is also the issue of energy resources. Some geological surveys suggest potential oil and natural gas reserves exist beneath parts of the seabed. Exact quantities are still debated, but the possibility alone increases the strategic importance of the region. Then there is fishing. For many coastal communities across Southeast Asia, fishing is not just business, it is cultural identity and survival. When access to fishing grounds becomes restricted, it can directly impact entire local economies. This is why fishing vessel confrontations sometimes happen in disputed waters. These encounters rarely make global headlines, but they are constant sources of tension. The larger global context also matters. Today's world is shaped by economic competition, supply chain security, and military positioning. Major powers focus heavily on strategic maritime zones. The South China Sea is one of the most important of these zones. For China, the region is linked to national security, shipping protection, and long-term resource planning. For Southeast Asian nations, it is about territorial sovereignty, economic independence, and resource access. For global powers outside the region, it is about maintaining open international trade routes. This is why the dispute is so difficult to resolve. Every side believes it is protecting long-term national interests. And this is why historical narratives become powerful tools. If a country can show historical connection, it strengthens political and legal arguments. But history is rarely simple. Records are incomplete. Archaeology is limited. Interpretations differ. This creates space for competing historical narratives to exist at the same time. So where does that leave the world today? The dispute remains unresolved. Diplomatic negotiations continue. Military patrols continue. Construction activity continues. Research continues. Political statements continue. But no final settlement has been reached. What we can say with certainty is this. The South China Sea is one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. Multiple countries have historical connections to it. Multiple countries depend on it economically, and global trade stability is linked to what happens there. What remains uncertain is how history, law, and power will ultimately shape its future. Some people see the situation as strategic defense. Some see it as territorial expansion. Some see it as an inevitable result of global power competition. The truth likely exists somewhere in between political positions, historical evidence, and future negotiation outcomes. And that is where this story stands today. Not fully resolved, not fully understood, and still shaping the balance of global power in real time.